Now we're going to talk about treatment for children and adolescents and families. Of course, this is a very vulnerable life period. Children, they are in these periods where they're transitioning either from elementary to middle or middle to junior or to high school, going to college. There can be issues that come up that make it more of a risk for a child to be vulnerable to substances such as a move, a divorce, getting away from support systems, if you will. And then, of course, the normal developmental changes that adolescents go through. Also, of course, peer issues in middle school and high school, even in elementary, can predispose that child to have more issues and be more predisposed to substance use. If you think back to the Average Childhood Experiences study, and we know the connection between ACEs in family and life, and then later risk for substance abuse use. So the research says that younger children who start using drugs and alcohol, of course, are more predisposed to have more problems in the future. Children as young as 9 or even 8 I've worked with in felony drug court who have been given drugs or have obtained drugs from home. We know that children we talked about as young as 9 have used these different drugs, but marijuana is most widely used with declining use of inhalants, alcohol, and cigarette usage. Vaping is also on the rise, and that's not in this PowerPoint. What causes a child to be more vulnerable to drug use in an early age are conduct disorders and behavioral temperament traits like risk takers, um, and different kinds of disorders that would predispose the child to be higher risk. And this can develop as early as 5 years of age. However, I would caution you to know that a lot of those disorders can be tracked to the issues within the home. More research talks about the characteristics leading to comorbid drug use and developmental problems. There are many characteristics that lead to comorbid drug and developmental issues, and those, of course, include impulsivity, ADHD, ADD, difficult temperament, below average IQ, not doing well in school, having a negative affect and mood, not able to regulate their emotions and calm themselves down, a low window of tolerance, not being socially competent, not able to have friends or peers that are positive, and being highly aggressive. And also would say those are all signs and symptoms of trauma. More research, slide 3. 12 to 13 years of age appears to be a turning point as a critical year. This is the turning point year. It is the most dramatic increase to drug exposure. Adolescents have to become independent thinkers and develop their own attitudes and drugs. That's where and that's where self-efficacy would come in to play. There's less parental involvement. We don't know what's going on. It's terrifying doing this right now when I have a 10-year-old child. But think about that. Middle school, they're starting to do things and being around peers are really important. And that's that turning point year. It's a really critical year. So making sure they are in positive activities, have positive peers and support and talking to you. And if you see some change in their behavior, that would be really a critical time to delve into that and find out what's going on. Risk-taking behavior, drinking and driving, acts of vandalism, engaging in unprotected sex. There are many consequences of the risk-taking behaviors that often lead to drug use. So when you're looking at these comorbid conditions, when kids are starting to act in these ways, you can be looking for drug use. The consequences of those risk-taking behaviors, of course, are drug addiction, pregnancy, legal problems, not being in school nutrition, and sometimes even death. The impacts. Major problems. This is a major problem to the kid and to the community. Risk takers are often a major problem to themselves and the community. 54% have tried an illicit drug before finishing high school. More than 35% have tried an illicit drug as early as 8th grade, including alcohol, tobacco, inhalants, and marijuana. Studies also report that 25% of school-age youth are children of alcoholics, which would also make you more vulnerable to using. Why do they use? Some of the reasons children and adolescents use substances are for experimentation, attempting to ease the stress of adolescence, modeling behavior of family members and peers. The other issues that occur, you're more likely to be a victim or perpetrator of violence. If you're using drugs or alcohol, you would be more at risk to have premarital sex or I guess I should say, sorry, unplanned sex, unprotected sex, putting you at risk for STDs, potential pregnancy, school failure, being injured. You see a lot of accidents that occur in kids who are drinking and driving, using drugs, and other risky behaviors. Other risky behaviors that may lead to substance use in children and adolescents includes mothers using drugs during pregnancy, individual factors that we know from genetics and environmental factors, biology, behavior, personality, everything that's being passed down to this child from its family line. Individual risk factors are the things we just talked about that turn into an adolescent having antisocial behaviors, stealing, vandalism, rebellious alienation, um, deviance, independence, psychopathology, and then high-risk personality factors for drug and alcohol use is sensation seeking, and this is from the literature. We used to teach this to the substance abuse clients: low harm avoidance and poor impulse control. Those personality factors make you a really high risk individually. So, of course, there are protective factors, just like anything else. You can talk about those as well. Of course, family factors include parental substance use and modeling, poor family management and parenting practices, conflict, and then, of course, trauma and abuse would be co-occurring with that to increase risk, would be a risk factor. Environmental factors are going to be coming from your school, from your peers, from low SES, not doing well in school, not having a good peer group, not having support at home, not having money, that not being from a low socioeconomic level, so that in poverty, you don't have your needs met. But there are protective factors. So children and adolescents have some protective factors to steer them away from drugs. Hallelujah. These factors include family and school. Family can be very positive. There can be more supervision and monitoring anti-drug family peer norms. Um, Positive school factors. There could be a positive teacher. There could be a positive friend group. There could be positive activities like drama or art or sports. So these things are protective against the other individual, family, and environmental risk factors. So it doesn't mean if you have a child or an adolescent with all of those issues, they may have many protective factors that keep them buffered from going into that lifestyle. Also, kids and adolescents are super resilient, but these resiliency factors also act as protective factors that steer children away from substance abuse. I'm talking very fast. It's because I'm hungry and I really want some Chick-fil-A. And so I'm trying to get through this. Plus, it's just rolling out. So let's go with it. The shorter the lecture, the better, right? So we can, oh my gosh, am I going to get done in 10 minutes? That can't be right. So anyway, there are all of these resiliency factors. So being socially competent, being able to problem solve, having coping skills, being a sense of autonomy and that self-efficacy, when you feel good about you and you have a sense of autonomy and purpose and future, you have goals in your life, things you want to do, you have an optimistic outlook, you have a positive outlook, you could have faith and spiritual connectedness, you could have all these risk factors that have a very strong faith and support in a religious or spiritual circle, and a sense of humor. It makes you highly resilient, and it's a huge factor in therapy and in resiliency and protective factors that buffer from issues such as substances. So what do we do? How do we prevent this? Early identification is key. We've got to figure it out and assess early risk factors, pay attention to those, and see what kind of protective factors we can build to help mediate the risk. How can we help parents to know what to do with a child who's a risk taker and high sensation seeking? How can we get the sensation seeking met? That child's going to need activities to get those needs met. That they're going to need to bungee jump or um, zip line or get into sports or learn a new skill. They're going to need to satisfy that need in a way that can be productive. Talking about drugs, monitoring their activities, get to know their friends, social media, huge right now. Helen does not have a phone. We're talking about an iPod that's going to be very limited to talk with friends, but that can quickly go south with their connection and you not knowing all the technology and being up to date on what they're doing, what they're talking about. But talking to your children, spending time with them, making sure you know what's going on with them and you know what their peer groups, okay, I'm going into this. This is all like nonsense stuff, but peer relationships, making sure that they have positive pro-social relationships with a group that doesn't use drugs, making sure they're doing well in school. And if they start to not do well, why? Could that be from some new friend group or substance that they've tried? The more that they use substances, the more likely they are to drop out of school and how it impacted academic performance. There are some positive outcomes for comprehensive drug prevention curriculum. It can strengthen and support resistance to drugs. Um, Youth tend to avoid initiating drug use. They understand the negative effects of drugs and they perceive peer disapproval. But if they're in a friend group that is pro-social in that environment, then they most certainly are going to lean more towards doing the drugs. And if they have low self-efficacy, if they're trying to fit in, if you can see how that is a recipe for disaster. Treatment, you must meet adolescent-specific needs dependent on the physician in the family and community. Very difficult population to treat. They usually have a multitude of issues, may have multiple diagnoses, but also where are they in that level of drug use and how are you going to deal with that? There are situations where they need to go into treatment. They're non-traditional, community-based, family therapy, social skills, medical relapse prevention, school support, attendance and self-help groups. There are so many different ways you can treat an adolescent. You want to really join with. I did adolescent substance abuse treatment for Fred Farrar. Golly, back in this is like maybe 11 years ago, and I had a curriculum I used, and now I cannot think of what the name of that was, but I had to get trained in it, and it was a relapse prevention curriculum with some psycho ed. We did some art therapy and recreation therapy, and that's where I learned about doing the CD of your life. It's so powerful to see what those kids drew and tried to communicate with me about their lives. There's a lot of Little Wayne, um, which was telling. I mean, the songs were powerful. I went and listened to them and tried to align with them. I even attended one of their baptisms. She wanted me to be there, and I went to her church and saw her be baptized, and that was powerful. So connecting with them and having rapport is of the utmost importance. Getting them to trust you so they will tell you about their drug use first and foremost, and then figuring out what kind of intervention you need. Do you need to put them in treatment? Is this something that you can handle one-on-one with some family counseling and some peer support or some outside support groups? Luckily, right now, we have a lot of online resources, so perhaps finding a team or support group could be something that we could do. It's not been something I've had a lot of luck with in the past. School support, medical and relapse prevention, talking to their doctor, talking to the school, having that cohesive model where you're all discussing this holistic approach. Treatment must address not only substance use, but all the underlying causes. So more along the lines of when you're doing this work, what's causing... Hello, teachers! That was my child. That's a good time to stop.